Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better. What are your most important judgments? They're the judgments that constitute the nature of your surreality. My surreality is my world. In other words, what I take reality to be. Your surreality is your world. In other words, what you take reality to be. Is my surreality or your surreality or anyone's surreality reality, the real world? Excellent question. We can answer it well only after becoming sages. I return to this question. However dubiously, each of us assumes that our own surreality is reality. Let's begin by considering the origin of your understanding of the world, the development of your surreality. Imagine yourself as an infant who has, as yet, no understanding of anything. You're able, though, to single out lots of different objects. In fact, you found yourself in a kind of primordial chaos that's now impossible to imagine. In addition to all kinds of inner sensations, such as hunger or pain, there was an overwhelming chaotic flood of different sounds, smells, sights, textures, and tastes. Unless you had some kind of sensory defect, you were able to single out an indefinitely large number of forms. If you had a sensory defect of some kind, there was still a huge, though smaller, range of forms. If, for example, you were blind, then sights would be missing, but everything else would be there. So, that's the starting point. How could understanding possibly have begun? How could you have started by experiencing that enormous multiplicity of forms and somehow come up with some initial concept or other? Please realize that this is way, way before the acquisition of language. There's no way to jump directly from experiencing the primordial chaos to learning words and grammar from a natural language. The sheer number of forms you were experiencing had to have been reduced, diminished, cut down, or you'd have never understood anything. That's the key. Two forms had to have taken to be one. Identity judgments are two-in-one judgments. Their logical form is X is Y. What appear to be two different forms are judged to be really only one. That simple idea is enormously powerful. Making identity judgments is how you reduce the chaos of endless forms into your surreality. Permit me two examples just to give you the main idea. For more details, see my The Concept of Existence, or Butchross, Being Qua Being. The first example. Let's imagine that your first concept was actually that of mother's face. You later were able to associate a word to it, namely ma, or mama, or mom, or whatever. How must you have learned it? Well, there's the baby you lying on your back in a crib looking up. Repeatedly, mother's face looms over you and appears in your visual field. You notice it. That keeps happening. Sooner or later, you recognize it as one rather than as two. What was the identity judgment? Always, this is that. To make a whole judgment using English, which of course you couldn't have done at the time, it would be the face, the visual form I'm seeing now is the face I saw before. What are two different pure forms are, in reality, just one form that is an entity, existent, something real. A pure form is just a form that's considered in isolation, in abstraction from any other forms. Pure forms are usually of no interest to us. Why? Only entities usually interest us. If something isn't taken to be real, we typically ignore it. If you had lacked the ability to make such primitive identity judgments, you'd have never understood anything. Since you now have a highly developed conceptual system, we can tell that you must have the ability to make identity judgments. That ability was innate. Your using it, though, depended upon the particular facts of your situation. Neat, huh? As we learned in the previous video, once you had one concept, you could develop a second concept by noting relevant similarities and differences among forms. That's just what you did. You eventually went on to develop a much more complete concept of your mother, as well as all your other concepts. Furthermore, again, your brain is good at remembering. Initially, you had to recognize each fresh appearance as your mother's face, but quickly, you just began to see each one as your mother. The ways we single out forms become quickly contaminated by the ways we understand them. The second example. Let's imagine that the next time you walk into your bedroom, you unexpectedly see a $100 bill lying on top of your bed. What would you do? It's easy. You'd grab it. You'd touch it. Why? To see if it's real. To ensure that you weren't hallucinating or delusional. At least in dreams, you've probably had visual hallucinations in which you saw something unreal. It's just a fact that we do sometimes experience unreal forms, non-entities. You immediately wanted to know whether or not that $100 bill is real, which is why you instantly tried to touch it as well as see it. The visual bill is a pure form. The tactile bill is a different pure form. Here's the question. Are there two forms or just one? If just one, it's real. It's an entity. The identity judgment for a real bill would be the $100 bill that I'm seeing is the $100 bill that I'm touching. Are the objects that you see also the objects that you touch? Wow, that's a fundamental question, isn't it? That's so fundamental with respect to your surreality that you may never have thought about it before. Just try imagining that to be false. Doing so will thrust you back towards chaos, that primordial welter of pure forms. Using our ability to make two-in-one identity judgments creates our surrealities. Obviously, there's a critical difference between a real $100 bill and an unreal one. One exists. It's an entity. You can spend it. The other doesn't exist. It's not real. It's a non-entity. Your surreality is your set of entities. Those entities are your world. So, although we don't initially create the content, the pure forms of our surrealities, we do create our surrealities by using identity judgments. The content was already there. We didn't create all those pure forms that we initially singled out. We obviously didn't create all the sights and sounds and so on of that initial chaos. You didn't create the visual form the first time you singled out your mother's face. What you did was to create your surreality by reducing the number of pure forms you experienced by identifying some as entities. We all did that. We don't remember doing it, but we did it. We did it automatically. It might be better to think that our brains did it automatically for us. Furthermore, importantly, we can change identity judgments. We can decide that something we previously thought was an entity was really a non-entity by withdrawing the relevant identity judgment. We can decide that something we previously thought wasn't an entity really was an entity by making the relevant identity judgment. 3 last points about identity judgments for now. 1. We don't have criteria we use for making identity judgments. Where would such criteria come from? How would we learn them? We just begin making identity judgments. They are rock bottom of our conceptual systems. In that sense, then, we are responsible for our own surrealities, and yet without guidance. That's the fundamental basis of our human condition. There are lots of options for different surrealities. Still, we can always change our minds too. For example, in a nightmare, I might be afraid of an axe murderer because I mistakenly take him to be real. However, I'm relieved when I wake up because I realize that he wasn't real. He was imaginary, like a fictional character in a story. 2. Once we make an identity judgment, we can always enforce the indistinguishability of the two forms as being one real entity. This follows from the fact that there are no criteria for making identity judgments. There are ordinary paradigms for using the concept of identity, such as applying it to connect visual and tactile forms, but we don't have to use them. When we make an identity judgment, there's no argument that can persuade us to abandon it. At this level, reason is impotent. 3. Is my surreality reality? That's the big question. My recommendation? Always keep an open mind. It's always wise to keep questioning. That's natural for philosophers. By way of contrast, a fanatic always just assumes that his or her surreality is reality. It turns out, though, that that's a very foolish, unwise way to live. An obvious reason for that is that the temporal domain of becoming in which we live is in incessant flux. When our thoughts and beliefs remain static, they are always in danger of becoming false, even if they were once partially, perspectively true. As we've seen, no thought is wholly true anyway. This is why, again, it's wise only to attach lightly to our beliefs and remain ready to revise them in the light of fresh experiences. This has been a lot of fundamental theory. Is there a payoff when it comes to flourishing emotionally? Yes. Philosophers who are wise, sages, always live better emotionally than fanatics or anyone else. To understand that, though, we need to understand where values come from. Let's consider that next. Let's end emotional distress.